I hope you've all had a chance to get outside and enjoy the beautiful weather this week. I found myself this week singing, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." And while I know that's a Christmas song, for me, this really is the most wonderful time of the year. I love fall. I can't imagine a week being any closer to perfection than this past week. The warm sun, the cool, crisp breeze, the brilliant autumn colors. It was just a holy wow this week. On one of my morning walks this week, I walked past a brilliant yellow tree, and the sunlight was twinkling through the branches in just the perfect way. It was beautiful. The leaves were letting go in a confetti of grace, and I gasped at the wonder of its beauty. I was filled from the top of my head to the tips of my toes with gratitude. I couldn't even help but erupt in a spontaneous burst of prayer. Thank you, Holy God, for the beauty and mystery of your creation. Thank you for this day. This moment is precious. Whatever thoughts I might have been having or whatever I might have been worrying about before that moment, that all just took a back seat in holy appreciation and gratitude. I think that that's one of the reasons that living in a climate with season changes is such a gift. It allows us the surprise and rediscovery of the extraordinary hidden in the midst of our ordinary. I know I will feel this way again when the first snow covers our world in glitter. And when those first tiny little buds bravely emerge from the thawing earth. The beautiful surprise of a transforming landscape wakes me up to the blessings around me, fills me with gratitude, and connects me with the deep roots of joy. If we are, in fact, rooted in joy, it seems that gratitude is the miracle grow, the nutrient that allows us that joy to grow and expand and flourish and bear fruit. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that while I was doing research to see how others had approached the topic of joy, I discovered that by far the biblical text of choice was the book of Philippians. And it makes total sense. It's a very joyful text. It expresses those pillars of joy that we've been talking about as we've been walking through these weeks: compassion, humility, gratitude. From the details in this letter, we know that Paul was writing from prison. Paul, who, of course, if you remember, was previously Saul, who had been part of the religious establishment and had been persecuting the followers of Jesus. Saul became Paul in an encounter with the risen Christ that changed everything for Paul. Instead of limits and boundaries that he felt that he had to zealotly protect, he realized that the door was in fact wide open for all who would come were welcome. And then he moved from town to town, sharing this message and starting churches. One of the churches that he started is the church in Philippi, and they are the recipients of this joyful letter. Now, starting churches to our middle American ears might sound like a pleasant, nice thing to do, but the good news of welcome and love, and ultimately the good news that the power structures and systems and hierarchies that humans have created and maintain, that none of these structures ultimately mattered in the kingdom of God. There was actually no Greek or Jew. There was no male or female. All of these categories and distinctions that humans were using to decide who was worthy and who was less than worthy, none of that mattered in Christ. This is a revolutionary message, which made Paul some pretty powerful enemies. And so as Paul is moving from city to city, planting churches with this good news, he also wasn't all that popular with religious elites and Roman officials. This revolutionary good news landed Paul in jail several times. During one of those times, he wrote this letter to the church in Philippi. The church in Philippi had sent someone from their community to Paul while he was in prison, support for him while he was in prison. And this letter is Paul writing back and expressing his thanks for their love and support and letting them know how he was doing. It is so interesting to me that the go-to for biblical joy was written from behind bars. How is it that these most joyful words come from within the walls of a prison? How is Paul able to write such a joyful letter? I mean, we of course know that joy is different from happiness, that joy it comes from somewhere much deeper. It's the happiness that doesn't depend on what happens. Joy is a spiritual way of engaging in the world. But still, I wonder, how does Paul keep that joy in his circumstance? When I struggle sometimes in my pretty comfortable life, I think the very opening of this letter gives us a clue as to how Paul maintains his connection to his deeply rooted joy. Hear these words from the opening greeting from the letter to the Philippians. I thank my God every time I mention you in my prayers. I am thankful for all of you every time I pray, and it is always a prayer full of joy. I am glad because of the way you have been my partners in the ministry of the gospel from the time you first believed until now. Gratitude. Constant thanksgiving for this community that he's not able to physically be with at the moment, but that he still knows that he is very much a part of. Thanksgiving for the ways that they have the support and the ways that they've offered care to Paul. How does Paul maintain his joy while incarcerated? Gratitude. We've been journeying with Ray Hinton for the past few weeks. We've been engaging his incredible story of the strength of his spirit to embody compassion, forgiveness, mercy, and love on death row. Gratitude is also a crucial part of Ray's story. Even on death row, surprisingly, Ray found that he had things to be thankful for. He was thankful for a mother who loved him unconditionally and taught him to have love and compassion for everyone. I'm not sure he would have made it through his experience without the values that his mother taught him and the love that she gave him. Ray also had an amazing best friend that stayed with him throughout the whole thing, visiting him regularly for 30 years, sharing life together. Ray was incredibly grateful for friendship. Ray also created community on death row. He made friends with the other inmates, 54 of whom were put to death while he was on death row. He also made friends with many of the guards. Some of them would even ask him advice about family or marriage. Many of the guards were rooting for Ray, hoping for his exoneration by the end of his time there. Ray built community on death row, and he had that to be thankful for. Ray has said the world didn't give you your joy, and the world can't take it away. You can let people come into your life and destroy it, but I refuse to let anyone take my joy. I get up in the morning and I don't need anyone to make me laugh. I'm going to laugh on my own because I've been blessed to see another day. And when you are blessed to see another day, that should automatically give you joy. On death row, Ray had his death staring him in the face daily. He watched the new friends that he had made walk past him on their way to execution. When you're living in the constant question of, is this the day that they are going to set the date for my execution? This puts things into focus in powerful ways. Ray knows for sure that every day is a gift to be thankful for, and so he is. Ray has said that oftentimes people run out of the rain, but instead he runs right into the rain. How can anything that falls from heaven not be precious? Having missed the rain for so many years, I am so grateful for every drop, just to feel it on my face. Gratitude. Researchers have found that our brains are wired for negative bias. Now, I'm sure that this probably had some very important survival purposes. It's very important for us to be able to recognize a threat if we want to survive. But this negative bias also has some negative consequences. If we are always seeing the threats or the negatives first. It seems, though, that gratitude cuts through this bias. When we say thank you, we make a choice to also see what is good and what is right, and not just the bad or the wrong. Now, Ray had a plethora of wrong and bad in his story of wrongful conviction and incarceration, and yet Ray began to be able to choose to see the good and the right, even in the midst of all of the wrong. Lots of times he found the good and the right in really unexpected places. Like within the friendship that he made with Henry Hayes, the man who was executed for the lynching of a young black boy. Choosing to see the good and the right can be transformational. Now you may be thinking, isn't this just kind of Pollyanna? Are you sure this isn't just naive positivity? Or maybe you're thinking, this could be worse. Maybe this is dangerous. What if we went about going always looking for the good and the right in the midst of the bad and the wrong? Might that lead to complacency or even to injustice? Interestingly, UC Davis professor Robert Emmons and his colleagues had studied gratitude, and they found that grateful people don't seem to ignore the negative aspects of their life. They simply choose to appreciate the positive as well. People with a strong disposition towards gratitude have the capacity to be empathetic and to take the perspectives of the other, and they are rated as more generous and more helpful people by their social networks. In their research, they found that grateful people are more likely to have helped somebody with a personal problem or to have offered emotional support to others. So rather than leading to complacency or to injustice, gratitude, choosing to see and celebrate the good, leads to greater empathy, compassion, and connection to others. And that, of course, gratitude grows joy. When I think about gratitude, the very first person that comes to my mind is my grandmother. If you met my grandma, you would just feel her joy. She radiates it. It is infectious. I've always been so amazed at her ability to view the world and all of her experiences, the good and the challenging, through a lens of gratitude. For as long as I can remember, she is one who counts her blessings instead of her hardships. And this inspires me. She didn't have an easy life of privilege. She was born into a very large, very poor family. Of course, what they lacked in resources, they had an abundance of love. In my mind has been with my grandmother a lot in these past few months. She recently moved into a nursing home, and it's been a very challenging transition. COVID-19 has been especially difficult for the oldest among us. Well, many of us have felt isolated and lonely during this time when we can't connect to our community in our regular ways. The elderly have been the most isolated. Many long-term care facilities and nursing homes don't allow visitors. Our oldest among us often don't have access to the technology that we've come to rely on as our lifeline during this time of social distancing. I can't even count how many times during this pandemic that I have given thanks for Zoom and for the connection that it allows us to maintain. Strict restrictions haven't allowed for visitors. So my grandma has said goodbye to family without knowing when or if she will see them in person again. And then when she arrived, she had to quarantine for 14 days in her room all alone. A difficult transition anyway in normal circumstances was made much more difficult by being isolated in a small room. My heart has been breaking for her. She's been scared and lonely, angry, upset, and grieving all of the things she has lost in this transition. She's expressed these feelings to several of us on the phone in conversation, which is kind of shocking when we're used to her upbeat attitude in the face of almost anything. Gratitude is something we practice. Sometimes we are fortunate, we are just wowed by gratitude, like I was this week when I was overcome by the beauty of nature. But a lot of times, gratitude is a choice, and sometimes it's a difficult choice. And we continuously need to choose to practice gratitude. After a few rough days, I was talking on the phone with my grandmother, and she was starting to sound a little better. It was inspiring and hopeful for me to observe her connecting to that muscle memory of her years of gratitude practice. She was sounding a little bit more like her positive self. She was asking me about what was happening in my life, and she was telling me things about her new space. She would struggle for a bit, and when she began to say something negative, it seemed like she would catch herself, and then she would choose to share with me something she was grateful for. The beautiful view out of her window, the kindness of a worker helping her, the card she had received. It took work, but she was remembering how to count her blessings rather than her hardships. I felt so proud of her and so hopeful. She will find her way back to her joyful self. Researcher Brené Brown, who studies human emotions like shame, vulnerability, and empathy, has said that she will never again speak about joy without also speaking of gratitude. Because in her research, she discovered that every single person she studied who described themselves as joyful had an active gratitude practice. Maybe a gratitude journal or a practice of sharing things that they were thankful for with each other when they gathered for dinner. Some kind of gratitude practice that they engaged in regularly. Brené Brown says an attitude of gratitude isn't quite enough, that joyful gratitude is something that is actively lived out. Gratitude is not merely a state of mind, it is something we practice. My grandmother has spent a lifetime practicing gratitude, and I can see how that muscle memory is helping her to find her way through her difficult transition. A couple of weeks ago, I suggested a practice of before breakfast blessing 6 people that we don't much feel like blessing. I've been practicing this, and while it's been difficult, it's also been rather wonderful in some ways. I've found that if I'm able to bless someone I'm struggling with, to pray the best for them and not curse them, that it has been liberating. It was as if I was starting my morning by turning these things over to God, and then I was free. I was unburdened by much of the negativity that I had been carrying around. This week, I'm going to practice gratitude by looking back over my day and counting 6 things I am grateful for just before I go to bed. I invite you to consider joining me. The more we practice gratitude, the more grateful we become. And the more grateful we are, the more joy we are able to experience. Perhaps this week we will sprinkle a little miracle grow of gratitude onto our deep roots of joy. I thank my God every time I mention you in my prayers. I am thankful for all of you every time I pray, and it's always a prayer full of joy. I am glad because of the way you have been my partners in the ministry of the gospel from the moment our journeys merged. Grace and peace to you all.